Welcome back to another episode of Rebel Driver's Garage. I am Scott. Today we're continuing to assemble my 428 Ford FE Big Block Ford. Today we already got the crank in, we got the block painted, the freeze plugs, cam bearings, that's all done. Now we got to get the rods and pistons in. Now what we have here is a set of Icon forged pistons. Icon is one of the brands underneath Keith Black and United Engine Machine, UEM pistons. They helped me out with the set. They helped me pick this out. This will give us about 9.8 to 1 compression with my 428 and medium riser heads. And these are lovely, absolutely lovely pistons. These are also free floating pistons. So the rods are bushed. So the rods, I had them resized and bushed at the local machine shop. They look brand new. And he also installed ARP rod bolts for me. So the first thing, in order to get the rods and pistons and piston rings in the block on the crankshaft, we got to put the piston on the rod. And this is how we do it. Now I did one already, right? I did one already. This is number one. So being free floating pistons means that the piston pin is not pressed into the piston itself, where you have to heat up the piston or the rod in, where the piston pin is pushed through the rod after you heat up the rod. No, these are free floating, so they just slide right through. But you have to have them stay in the piston so the piston pin does not come out of the piston. So how do you do that? Well, they have these little spiral locks, yes. And I actually just did one off camera so I could figure it out and you wouldn't have to listen to me swearing while I figure it out. So, and I'm actually surprised. These actually works really well. Big kudos to United Engine Machine for designing spiral locks. As you can see, my fingers aren't bloody, and I'm not mad, and I'm not about to throw tools across the room. So, hang on while I show you the first step. In order to get the rods and pistons in the engine, we got to put the pistons on the rods. One of the things I did to make it a little easier for myself was I kind of set up a table to work on. You can do this on your workbench, but if you can see my workbench back there, it's a mess. So, instead of spending 2 days cleaning that mess up, I set up a new table to work on. These are just 2 sawhorses and some plywood that I had lying around. Now, the first thing is that we need a couple of things. We're going to need a little bit of assembly lube, the pistons, the rods, obviously, and the spiral rocks. The spiral rocks came in this package here, but I've already taken them out and put 2 in each piston because you need 2 for each piston. The piston pin, as you can see here, these are tool steel, and these are 4032 forged pistons. They have a 16cc dish in them. And so that comes out to be about 9.8 to 1. And again, with the rods, I'm dropping my rings. Here are the rods. These are 6.49 length, I believe, for Ford 428s, also on 390s and some other engines. This is a bushed end. As you can see, the rod has the small end of the rod has a bushing on it. It's been pressed in and then machined to a specific diameter to fit the piston pin. Now the first thing we're going to do is take the piston pin out of the piston, and then I'm going to lube it up a little bit. I just put a little bit of this assembly lube on it, this lubricant plate on the piston pin. You don't need very much at all. All it's doing is you're helping it to get into the piston a little easier and through the rod, connecting rod as well. And That's what these paper towels are for. So, the other thing you got to do next is find out your orientation. Now, on some engines, it's very specific of which piston goes towards the front of the engine, which way the piston faces, and it's sometimes there'll be an arrow in the machined into the face or etched into the face or stamped into the face that says, you know, that way. Say that's the front of the engine and this is the back of the engine, that way. So when you put it on the rod, and your rod is like sitting in the engine in a V configuration, like that, right? That the correct valve relief is underneath the correct valve. Now, on some engines, like, you know, big block Chevys and small block Chevys, often the valve relief for the intake side is bigger than the exhaust side. Now, these are not any, as you can see, these valve reliefs are exactly the same size. So, they have a diagram that they send out with this. I don't know if it's focusing. It tells you which way is which, and for several different engines, but these do not have a specific, as you can see, one valve relief isn't bigger than the other. So it doesn't matter. But we do need to have them facing correctly. Obviously, if this is your deck, and this is your deck, your piston holes are here, in your deck here on your block, the valve reliefs are always facing up. If your valve reliefs are upside down, you did something wrong. Alright, so the other thing you need is you need to connect your connecting rod needs to be orientated correctly in the piston. So, and there is a difference between which side is which. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. On these Fords, they have an oil hole up here that needs to face towards the center of the engine, up towards the camshaft. The other way to tell is that the rod is always stamped before the rod's removed from the engine block, and the side of the rod that you can stamp is always towards the outside or the pan rail as you've got the engine upside down on an engine stand. The other, this stamping here also coincides with the connecting rod's bearings, which always have a tang on the bearings that sit in the rod. See how there's like these little tang slots? Those go towards the outside of the block. So here's the crankshaft running down the middle of the block, and the rod sits like this, going up at, like I say, a 45-degree angle on a 90-degree V8. You want the tangs for the connecting rod facing downward towards the outside of the block, and the oil hole facing up towards the connecting camshaft. And then the number that's stamped on the outside of the rod for the engine that's been dismantled, being stamped, is on facing outside of the block towards the pan rail as well. So that means that the piston goes on like so. Right? Very simple. So now we know which way it goes. We put my glasses on so I can see. My arms are no longer long enough. So this is number 2. It says stamped number 2 on both the cap and the rod, main part of the rod. And put it on like so. And then we slide the slippery piston pin, now it's got assembly lube on it, through. Now these things are kind of stubborn because they think like they went in one way or the other. There's like a little ridge here for the snap ring, and maybe I'll try it the other way. Ah! Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do before I try to put the piston in the pin through the piston is in the rod is I'm going to take a little bit of brake clean on a rag and make sure this is nice and clean. These piston rods have been sitting on the shelf for a few months now. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this assembly lube and I'm going to spread it around inside the bushing here. And then make sure I have the orientation right. So don't get in a rush. This is one of those things. It's being Mr. Patience. All right. Slide the pin, which is it's a snug fit to get the pin through these machined ends. There we go. Okay. There it goes. There we go. Get that out of the way so you can see it. I'm not going to need it yet. Now I pushed it in far enough to get to the exposed. There's a ring in here for the snap ring, which I dropped on the ground. The snap ring, there's a ring in here for the snap ring to fit into. Right? And it's one on each side. It keeps the piston pin from going out the side of the piston. If the piston pin comes out of the side of the piston and then starts dragging up and down on your cylinder bore, that's bad. So, reading the instructions that they have, you want to get the snap ring opened up, so it's basically like a spring, so you want to kind of stretch it out a little bit like this so you can get your fingers in between it. And the first thing you want to do is you take the tang end, or basically the end of the snap ring, and you get it started into the groove like so. Now I thought you just kind of twist the snap ring around and it kind of coils its way in, but it doesn't work that way. What they suggest is that you use a small screwdriver to push it in once you get the end of it in and started. So, like so. I'm trying to do this on camera where you can see it and where it's convenient. So, what I am doing is I'm pushing up on the opposite end of the section that I want to push into the groove, like this. See how it's being pushed down in there with the little screwdriver? And the last set I did with another set of pistons doing this, man, was it difficult. And these, once you get started, it actually goes pretty easy. You just kind of go around in a circle and continue to push the snap ring down into the groove in a circle until the whole thing is in the groove. See? Then we got to do the other side. The other side's a little more difficult to do because the piston pin is pretty close to the groove now at this point. Take the snap ring, stretch it out a little bit, and then once again stick the snap ring down in there into the groove and kind of push it from the opposite side that you're trying to shove down when you get just trying to get it started, like so. And it might be a little bit stubborn, but once you get going here, about halfway around the first circumference, it becomes much easier. See that? Look at that. There you go. See? It's in. Now, double check you have your orientation right. The bottom of the piston the valve reliefs up at the top. The numbers are at the bottom of the valve reliefs, or the tangs are at the bottom of the valve reliefs, or the bottom of the piston as it would sit in the block. Also, you want to make sure that you have free movement. See? It's really, really bad if the piston does not want to move freely on the pin, or the connecting rod does not want to move freely as well. So make sure and double check the other side. Make sure it didn't pop out when you're doing the second side, and everything's good. And double check that it's all in there, nice and snug, because you don't want this thing to pop out when the engine's running. All right, 2's done. Now we got 6 more to go, just like it. All right, now that we have all 8 pistons on all 8 rods, we got to go to the next step, which is sizing the piston rings to fit the bore. Let me do this one-handed. Okay, so you need to know what the specs are for your particular application. Naturally aspirated engines don't need as much piston ring gap, and the gap is what you see right here, is the space between the 2 ends of the ring and the circumference of the cylinder bore. And what you're doing is you're measuring that when you have to use a feeler gauge. So that's one of the tools you'll need. So what you do is you take a piston like that, you get it in there near the top, and to make sure that it's even and flat across, I just use a piston and I push it in to where it's kind of even like this on both sides. See? This. And then we look down into the gap, and it's pretty tight. That's way too tight for this bore. So that's that's 14 thousandths of an inch right there, and it's way too tight. So there you go. Focus on that. And they recommend 4 thousandths gap for every inch of bore, I believe it is. Let me see here. There we go. Or 1 thousandths, excuse me, 1 thousandths gap per inch of bore. So on this, it's 4. This bore here is 4.155. Times that by 0.004 for naturally aspirated, you get about 16 thousandths of an inch, or a little more than what they have here. It's 6.016662. I like to have a little bit more than that, just for my own sake. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be trying to get all these around 20 thousandths, which means I got to open this gap up. And that is where we have these 2 tools. I have 2 different versions here. This is a homemade ring filing. Looks like I used a Dremel. A friend of mine put this together for. Let me borrow it. And then another friend brought over this one, which is a hand crank one with a kind of unique handle on it now. And these are pretty inexpensive. You can get those at Summit Racing or whatever. Some of the local parts stores can order it for you. Now, the rings, you have a top ring, you have a secondary ring, and then you have your oil control rings. These are the ones that look like this, and then they have a really thin one that goes on top and bottom. We are gapping the top ring and the secondary ring, and we're going to be doing 2 different ones. So I'm going to try for 20 thousandths on the top ring and 24 thousandths on the secondary. They recommend a little bit like 16. I like a little bit more. just because I want to have a little extra space in case there is some heat in the cylinder. And what happens is if it's too tight, these two ring ends will hit each other, and then they'll fold up like this, and then they'll break the ring gland on your piston, which is not good, or they'll break the ring itself. The other thing you need to do when you install the rings in your pistons is you got to install them right side up. A lot of rings will have, where is it? Will it focus? Hang on a second, let me get this thing to focus. There. See that dot there on the ring? That means that's the top side. Now these rings here have a beveled edge on the inside. You see the beveled edge? That needs to be upwards. The second rings are different. They still have the dot on the top, but they do not have a beveled edge on the inside or outside. So these rings are 1/16, 1/16, and 3/16 in thickness. So these came with the pistons. These are OEM pistons, and they were marked top and second in the packaging. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through all the rings and file fit all of them to each individual bore, and then put the rings on the piston before we go into the process of putting the piston in the bore and onto the crankshaft. Okay? So we're going to do all that first. Okay, to file fit your rings, you need the rings, obviously. You also need, get stuff out of the way. Oops, knocking everything on the table. You'll need a ring file. You also need a feeler gauge, like these. And then you need a small file, or in my case, I'm using, this is a piece of 600 grit sandpaper that I can, after I file it, I can knock the burrs off with into the rings once we grind it down. So, get this one out of the way. I'll do this by hand right now. So what you do is you set the ring up against it, keep it flat, and you just grind on it. And the wheel does the work. You do not have to press hard. See how we got to take like 6 to 8 thousandths off this ring. I'm going to give it a little bit of work. And then do the other side a little bit. I think these are Molly rings, but I'm not positive. I'll have to look up the part number. Okay, now let's see where we're at. Now this is something we're going to have to probably go back and forth a bunch of times. Okay, stick the ring in the bore, kind of near the top. Take your piston, slide it in. That way you know it's in there parallel to the deck of the thing. Get your feeler gauge out. So we're looking for 20 thousandths. So here's 20 thousandths. And we are not quite there yet. So I'm going to file a little more of it. filing off. Just taking any burrs that might be on there off. Look at that. Perfect. That's at 20. That one's ready to be installed on the piston. Now we're going to do secondary ring, which I'm going to open up a little bigger. Well, that one's at 20 thousandths already, but I wanted this one like on 24. It's nice and even. Okay, after a little bit of filing, measure that one. This is at 24 thousandths. That's with the feeler gauge. And nice. Okay. The other thing to remember when you're putting these in and when you're filing these is you fit them to the cylinder that the rings are going to go into. So this is number 5 cylinder. This is my number 5 rod and piston here. And I'm going to install them on the number 5. That way, and then when I do the number 6, I'm going to use the number 6 here and so forth and so on. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is put the oil ring on, or the expander for the oil ring. The oil ring's 3 pieces. See how it just goes on super easy like that? There really isn't much to do that. Then you have 2 of these other ones, right? One goes up on top and one goes down on the bottom. You don't really need a ring expanding tool for the most part. Sometimes I use it too, but for these, they usually go in pretty easily. So, what you don't want to do is force these wide open, okay? Because you'll snap them. And then you're calling the piston manufacturer or the ring manufacturer to get more rings. I've done that. I did that on my 454 when I was building it. I got a little rambunctious. So it's best to have the openings in different spots. Some people like, some people like them like 180 out, which is what I'm going to try to do here. If I can get it to turn. There it goes. There we go, 180 out. And then we need this little tool here to it pulls the ring open so you can get it into the ring groove. Nice and easy. Oops, not quite in there. There we go. Now I'm going to rotate that so it's on this side of the piston pin. And make sure that dot's facing upward, otherwise you'll be doing this again. You can always double check your work once it's in. You can always take it back out and redo it. These expand pretty nice and easy compared to some of them I've actually done. Come on, that's good. Oops, that's not in the groove. Not in the groove there. Let's go up. Yep, there we go. There we go. See? And rotate that around. And this one's ready to be installed. I'm going to go move on to number 6. I'm kind of doing the 6, 7, 8 ones first. So I'm going to be starting all over. Filing these 2 rings down. We're going to do this 7 more times, because we have several more pistons to do. And, you know, taking your time, being patient, don't get over rambunctious filing. It's better go back a few times instead of having a gap that's too big that you can't go back on. Okay, we are finished putting the rings on the pistons and the pistons on the connecting rods. The next step is to get the connecting rods and pistons into the engine block, and we're going to do, there's a couple of steps that are on that, so I'm going to separate these 2 videos so it's not very super long. So the next video is going to be me putting these in here, and what we're going to be doing is, we're like we did with the crankshafts, we're going to be checking bearing clearances just to be on the safe side. And then we're going to use a ring compressor, one of these lovely little things that are known to be a pain in the butt to use if you're not real careful with them, but it's not too difficult really. There's a couple of little tips you can use, and we're going to do that next. So follow along. Thanks for watching. If you like these kind of videos, like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. Thanks for watching.